I'm going to call on Mary Church, who is from Friends of the Earth Scotland. She's their head of campaigns. Mary, thanks for all you do for us, and welcome to your contribution to the conference today.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, so the wide-ranging nature of the contributions that we've heard today show us, how complex this agenda is and the scale of the challenge that we're up against. And I think I just wanted to use my few minutes in this closing plenary to take us back to some of the themes from the first panel on the global struggle for justice and some of the questions that they raised for us in our movement for just transition. And first up is, time is clearly not on our side, right? There's an urgency to this work that we're doing, and it's starting to make itself felt almost constantly, right? In the really brutal reality of climate impacts, the new normal of weather-related states of emergency, the hellish wildfires, floods, cyclones, droughts, that we're now seeing, yes, very much in the global south, but also increasingly across the Northern Hemisphere as well. And this is, to remind us, this is at only 1 degree warming. At present, emissions rates will have locked in 1.5 degrees warming within only a few years. And current commitments under the Paris Agreement are putting us on track to a really unimaginable 3 to 4 degrees warming. So really there's that sense of urgency. And while none of us are ultimately safe from the climate impacts, it is the poorest, both within and between countries, who already are and will continue to suffer first and worst unless we turn this around, right? So the urgency is really there. So one of the big issues for us to grapple with then, and particularly so against a background of rising authoritarianism, how do we manage that tension between the urgency of responding to the climate crisis and the fact that it must be a just transition in that broadest sense? Because to do things justly, for the transition to be, truly transformative in improving the lives of the many and lifting the many out of poverty, for all of the voices to be heard and all of the needs to be met, inevitably that takes time, and that's messy, and it's challenging for us. So how do we ensure that we are situating our struggle for a just transition here in Scotland in that wider global context, within the reality of our relative wealth and the roots of that wealth in colonialism and slavery, and the fact that the climate ambitions of the present government, right, that we find really challenging, to meet those, albeit inadequate ambitions. We're finding it a challenge to meet them, but they're based on continuing to take far more than our fair share of the atmospheric space, right? So a new form of colonialism, carbon colonialism. How do we ensure that a just transition for fossil fuel workers, for example, here in Scotland, happens within a timescale that reflects climate fair shares, that doesn't further entrench or ignore global injustices by sticking with the current economic model and simply replacing one source of energy with another source of energy, or relying on the seductive false solutions of negative emissions technologies and nature-based solutions to either or both push the difficult questions, right, the difficult decisions into the long grass, or indeed onto the shoulders of the global south. And concretely, what does that mean for how long we can keep extracting and using fossil fuels here in Scotland and the UK? How and where we source the raw materials needed to create the renewable energy infrastructure to decarbonize our economy, how we substantially reduce our energy consumption, but not, reduce the standards of living of the many, and therefore how much new infrastructure we actually need. And what does that mean for how we broaden the focus of our work on just transition here in Scotland from, focusing mostly on the industrial and the energy intensive sectors to the wider economy, right, both formal and informal, and start changing the way that we think about and value work? How do we keep what's meaningful and what's valuable from the sort of identities and the communities that we're, forged through working in industries that have, at the center of causing the climate crisis? So industries that also in many ways embody and entrench patriarchy, while discarding from those who keep what's valuable and meaningful, but discard what can no longer serve us, what cannot serve the transformation. Because for the the just transition, it has to be a work-led transition. There's lots of haves around what this transition must be, and one of the really important things is it also must be a feminist transition for it to be a just transition. So these are, you know, really big questions, right, with no easy answers, although between us, like, we've clearly got loads and loads of ideas. For me, I think it's really time that we start to expand the scope of how we think about just transition here in Scotland, and ask ourselves whether we are embracing those 4 principles that Asad highlighted earlier, whether we're doing that, whether we can do that. In terms of how we do that, I think, you know, coming back to some of the things that Jackson mentioned there, I think, you know, and we've talked about offline as well, you know, one of the most valuable things about the Just Transition Partnership, so the partnership that's put on this conference today, and actually we've achieved some really important concrete advocacy wins as well, but perhaps more importantly is this space that we've created to come together to have that conversation, you know, as Jackson mentioned, and to learn from and challenge each other, and to build that red-green alliance. But we need to build on that, you know, not just be happy with the red-green alliance, make that much broader, reach out to other movements. And actually, what better opportunity for us to do that than with the COP26 coming to Glasgow, coming to Scotland, and along with it bringing, you know, much of, not possibly not enough of, given the context of the pandemic, but much of the international climate and wider justice movements with it. So to really challenge ourselves and learn from those wider movements about how our struggles intersect. And that work is already going on. We talked about this in one of the breakouts. You know, a lot of that work is already going on under the auspices of the COP26 coalition, which represents a whole breadth of civil society interests and has, you know, caucuses, including trade union caucuses, racial justice, disability, youth. And together we're organizing mobilizations and a counter summit, the official UN summit, where we can come together, get to know each other better, learn from each other, strategize for how we continue this fight long after the COP has left town. So yeah, just we would invite you all on this conference to participate in that. There will be parallels, virtual program as well. So invite you wherever you are in the world to take part in that. Yeah, just to finish by saying, obviously the scale of the task is absolutely enormous. You know, since I think we've had loads of inspirational quotes today. We started the day with one. I'm going to finish what I'm saying now with one. In the words of the late civil rights campaigner John Lewis, you know, so the scale of the task is huge, but if it's not us, then who? And if it's not now, then when?